I think this truly is a bipartisan bill. If this bill's been described as belonging to one party or the other, it's wrong. We sit down, and I think that Senator from North Carolina, Senator Burr, and Senator Alexander, and Senator Coburn, myself, Senator King, and we had Senator Carper, and looked at basically how we could fix something. And I think we looked at it from the standpoint that this deadline hit. We knew 1 year ago when we extended it, they said it was a political atmosphere, we had to extend it. And we knew that year would come, and if, like everything else that's happened here for the last 2 or 3 years, nothing gets done. So we just said enough was enough. It has to be fixed. And if you want to fix it, look at the whole program. You had to understand the programs. I think now they're saying that, accusing that the students are paying profit so that we can pay down debt. Whether there's profit built in or not, depending on the accounting procedures that's used by our federal government, it was built in. You can blame whoever you want to blame, but it's built into it. We've got to deal with the facts in front. So, Senator, I think what I would ask, we have proven that we're willing, all of us have agreed in a bipartisan manner, no profit will be made on the backs of students, what we can determine through our bill that we're working on, right?
Incorrect.
So we've all come to that agreement as Democrats and Republicans, no profit for debt reduction. It should all go in lowering the rates, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we've agreed to that. We've agreed on a long-term fix, 10 years versus kicking it down the road for another year, knowing another year will come and go, and we'll probably be sitting here again debating it. That's what we've come to the conclusion. And we've also agreed, which is different than what the House sent us, and I applaud you all for working with us, to put a fixed rate. So if it's at 3.66 this year and I borrow, and I'm able to qualify, and I'm subsidized at $3,500, a subsidized loan that the taxpayers will be paying, that 3.66 is fixed for the full life of the loan. We agreed on that, correct?
That's correct.
So these are things that we've come, and when they say it's the Republican bill or that's so erroneous, and it's just not fair. This is truly a bipartisan effort, and we're working with all of the colleagues in my caucus, and I know you all in your caucus, to understand that if I'm a subsidized Stafford loan, that means that the federal government, the taxpayers of this country, will pay my interest while I'm in school, correct?
That's correct.
At the end of that, then I pick up whatever interest rates that have accumulated when I was in school, and I take it from that day forward. What they didn't understand, and I think what a lot of our colleagues don't understand, I can't make it just on that $3,500. I've got to go and borrow more money. So now I'm borrowing money. If I go with my colleagues on the Democrat side, I've got to borrow all that at 6.8%. We were able, Senator, in a bipartisan way to bring that to what, 3.66 for all undergraduates, correct?
You're correct, and I might add to my good friend that this chart shows exactly what he talked about, that under the plan that we will vote at 12 o'clock, because of the need for students in the subsidized category to borrow additional money at 6.8%, at the end of their process, they owe $78 a month, where under the bipartisan bill, where every undergraduate is treated the same, they owe $75. It's actually cheaper, even for the undergrads that are subsidized.
But what I'm saying is, the money that I have to borrow, even though I qualify because of my income for a subsidized loan, I don't have to pay the interest on an annual basis. I don't make it on that, so I do have to pay it. So by bringing it down to one low rate, I make a much lower payment. It's less obligation, it's less hardship on me as a college student to make that lower payment than it would be to make the higher payment, just because the optics were, we want to help the subsidized, the really poor kids. I might be poor, but I can't make it on just what you'll give me because I'm poor. I got to have a little bit more help. And we're not looking at the whole picture here. And then on top of that, I want to go to graduate school after I get my college degree. Then you bump me up, I'm at 6.8 again. Ours brings it down to 5.21, which is more savings, which the Senator, I know, agrees to. Senator, if I may, and I might ask our Senator from Tennessee, my colleague from Tennessee, whoever would like to start to talk about this, but let's say that right now we know we have a consolidated cap at 8.25%. So let's say that I graduated and I went to school during high recession times. So at the end, I have an 8.75% accumulative interest I owe. I can cap that and go in and consolidate 8.25, correct? Senator from Tennessee?
If I may respond to the senator from
Absolutely.
West Virginia. First, I'd want to congratulate Senators Manchin and Burr for helping the full Senate understand this issue. This is like a lot of issues we have to face, not simple. I mean, I used to be a college president. I used to be the United States Secretary of Education. I had to re-educate myself on this legislation. I still made some mistakes. I was saying last night, for example, that there were only 2 million subsidized loans. And what I was forgetting was the point that the senator from West Virginia makes, which was 80% of the students who have subsidized loans, the low-income students, also have the unsubsidized loans. So when you only take care of these subsidized loans, you're leaving 7 million students with unsubsidized loans up here hanging high and dry, and nobody's taking care of them. So you're hurting both the middle-income families and the low-income families when you have an incomplete solution. But the question, the senator from West Virginia posed the question: Is it right that, let's say I graduate from the University of Tennessee and I've had 2 loans. I've had the subsidized loan, and that means the government's been paying my interest while I'm in college. And typically, if I'm like 4 out of 5 students, I've had a unsubsidized loan, so I've paid that interest. And suddenly the interest rates have gone up for me because, the interest rates have gone up to 10%. What I can do is take both those loans, I could take all my government loans at once and turn them into an 8.25% loan. So that's in effect a cap on my loan. And that means, and then I would have the choice, and I would say this back to the senator from West Virginia or North Carolina: when I consolidate my loan at 8.25%, I've heard some senators say, well, that just means the student's going to have to pay a lot of interest because it spreads the loan out over a long period of time. But does not the student have that choice? I mean, isn't it like if you want a 15-year mortgage, you have higher monthly payments, but you pay less interest because you pay it off quick. But
what they're referring to, and it might be misunderstood, Senator, if I may, is that everyone will take the longest period of time. Mm-hmm. I'm understanding, and I think I'm accurate and correct on this, that, okay, I want the smallest payment. I just got out of school, so I want my smallest payment. Now I'm getting better jobs 4 or 5 years out. I got a better job. Instead of paying $150 a month, I can afford to pay $300 or $400 on my. There is no penalty for me to shorten that, as it would be in a conventional market. Is that how you understand it?
if the senator would, Madam President, I'd ask consent that the senator from North Carolina and West Virginia and I be permitted to engage in a colloquy for a few minutes.
Without objection.
That's how I understand. I would say to the senator from North Carolina, if I would presume a graduate of the University of North Carolina would be smart enough to make that decision for herself or himself, wouldn't you think?
Well, I think they would. I think one of the agreements that we came to was that students ought to be in control of their decisions about their loan rate based upon what was available to them. And if a student goes through the next 4 years and they have a combined interest rate of about 4.5%, for the life of the loan, why in the world would they be excited at an 8.25? If for some reason 10 years from now somebody got out of school and their combined interest rate was 9%, we give them the option of going back to 8.25. And I think the senator from West Virginia made an extremely good point. For the most subsidized student, they can only borrow $3,500 that's subsidized.
That wrong?
So you think of the institutions that are out there, none of them have an annual tuition of $3,500. We know that they're going to borrow out of the 6.8% pot. What we're offering is that the pots are the same, and that the subsidy is that for students that qualify for the subsidy, they're not responsible for the interest rate while they're in school. That subsidy still exists. It's just we're not overcharging one group, and we're certainly not overcharging the ones we just subsidized because they've got to borrow more money to complete their college education.
My friends, let me just say that I graduate now, no matter what the interest rates are, no matter what they might have been. I graduate, and economic times are tough. I find a job, it's not what I think my value is, but I find a job at $40,000. And $40,000, I'm married now and I have a child or two. Don't we have in our bill a protection which has been in place for a long time? Both Democrats and Republicans have supported this protection, which is called income-based repayment. I'm only, by law, I can only pay 15% of my disposable income, and I think that breaks down to my payment can only be $142. $142, and so isn't that a subsidy too? Or wouldn't we be subsidizing that to a certain extent? And I'm also understanding if my economic condition doesn't improve, and that's all I pay, by the end of 25 years, it's exonerated. I pay nothing. I'm done.
If I could respond to the senator, the answer is yes to that. Not only is there, and I think it's fair to say that the consolidation option that a student has in case the rates go up at 8.25% can be called a cap. Not a hard cap, but it's a cap. And the second cap is this income repayment provision that you speak of. If you're making $40,000 a year, after they apply the formula, you probably aren't spending more than about 10% of your income. It's something called disposable income that you can be required to pay on your student loan, and that continues for about 20 years. And if at the end of 20 years you haven't paid it off, the loan is forgiven. So any student who has a loan has that opportunity. They can consolidate at 8.25%, and income repayment limits the amount they have to pay each year. So they have that. And then one of the things I noticed about the Manchin-Burr bill that I'd like to ask the senators to talk about a little bit is that you've come up with a really, what I'm beginning to understand as I study this more and more, is a very significant contribution. The idea that all of the undergraduate student loans, which as I understand it are about 2 out of 3 of the loans, ought to have the same interest rate. It's confusing the way it is now. But the other reason is about 80% of the people who have subsidized loans, low-income students, also have unsubsidized loans. And so your contribution is to say, let's simplify it, provide certainty over a long period of time, and treat all undergraduates the same. Otherwise, it seems to me, you're leaving 7 million middle-income students who have unsubsidized loans high and dry, and the 80% of the low-income students who also have these unsubsidized loans, you're not helping them either. So I wonder if you could comment on this idea. And I notice without a cap, you're able to get the interest rate for all undergraduates loans down to about 3.66%, which is a pretty low rate.
Let me just say that very quickly. I'll use $10 million hypothetically that's borrowed every year. 10 billion, 10 million, whatever you want to use. 25% of that money goes to the subsidized, just 25%. And I understand that's close to about 40% of the students that participate in borrowing money. But the volume of money is about 25%, 1/4 of the money that's loaned out. So if we're keeping the rates low on 1/4 of the money, that means that we artificially have much higher rates on 3/4 of the money that students need to get an education. What we're saying is we're going to bring a larger majority of that down to the lowest rate. And we think it's a good policy that we should be discussing and talking about. And that's where we are. And that's why we come up with the plan that we did. But we reduced all the rates. The plus loans I think, Senator, went from 7.9, 6.21? Yep, and then we had the graduate loans went from 6.8 to 5.21. But if you do all of the undergraduate, it would go from 3.4 to 3.66, a quarter, 2.6, a 0.26.
Is for the undergraduates that were not subsidized, they would go from 6.8
right.
to 3.6.
Well,
and this gets at the heart of what the senator from Tennessee said, is that today subsidy goes to 26% of our students. 55% of our students pay the 6.8% rate. Under the bipartisan bill, 64%, all undergraduates get 3.66. So if this is about affordability, if this is about what provides the greatest flexibility for students to afford it, then the answer is clear. It's on the chart, but it also computes in the monthly payments that students are obligated to. And the fact is that for a typical student in their first year, taking $5,000 out, $3,500 comes as subsidy, $5,500, $35 comes from subsidies, $2,000 comes from the 6.8% rate. They actually, I'd be happy to yield for a question.
I just want to ask this, Sarah, I couldn't see the chart from the other side, so I came over here. On that undergrad students, 3.66%, you have 64%. For how many years does that hold? That 3.66%, how many years?
It holds for 1 year till the readjustment of the 10-year bond, which could be higher, it could be lower. It's higher today than it was in May.
And what does the CBO project that interest rates will do in the next 3 or 4 or 5
Well,
years?
I'm sure that the senators come with a chart on the CBO and the projections.
But
let me just say that we've got an 8.2%, 8.25% consolidation cap. And the reality is that if you're going to move to a market-based system, the question that we have as senators is how do we drive interest rates the lowest for our nation's students? And if you put a hard cap of 8.25, then all of a sudden this interest rate goes up. If we're getting to a zero surplus, it's not going to cost us anything, we're not going to make anything. 3.66 goes up, it doesn't go down. So by having the flexible cap at 8.25, where anybody can consolidate at any time, we're able to do it at the 10-year bond plus 1.85, and this is all CBO numbers. I mean, we're using the same source for this. But I think at the heart of this, and I say for my good friend from West Virginia, the real question is, are we going to let 26% participate in an attractive interest rate, or are we going to extend it to 64%, which is the entire class of undergraduates?
That was a bipartisan agreement that we've had, which I appreciate very much. Let me just say one thing. Here's the last 10 years. The last 10 years, if we would have used the last 10 years with the bipartisan bill would have been kicked in, this is what the students that basically are paying the higher rate now, 6.8% frozen, would have been able to take advantage of the lower rates. They never got a chance to take advantage of the lower rates. All we're assuming is if rates go up in 3 or 4 years, they're going to be paying higher rates. We never assume with the market, and that's the reason why you fluctuate with the market on a 10-year T-bill. This would have happened if the 10-year T-bill, look how much lower rates would have been paid in the last 10 years. I know that we can all use figures, you know, any way you want to use them, but the bottom line is it's either going to be market, which has always been market before, and there's been caps that have been much higher, and we're trying to find something that's going to be affordable. But the bottom line is, do we try to protect at the lowest rate? Most undergraduates have the hardest times. Once you get your undergraduate degree, you've got a much higher percentage of making it if you want to get a graduate degree and a higher PhD degree. You've got a much better chance. And the bottom line is we want to keep the rates as low so when you go out, you're not burdened with the highest payments. And we have a lot of protections built in that I think a lot of times goes misunderstood and is not explained properly. And I'm glad we're having this colloquy back and forth.
Well, would the senator from Iowa like another question?
I had a statement to make, but not a question.
Well, I'll wrap up in a little while.
Okay.
You know, the
if we want to get into a colloquy, that's fine.
Well, I'd rather make my points
Okay.
that I need to do, because at 12 o'clock, we're going to vote on one bill. We're going to vote on a 3.4% extension, kicking the can down the road for 12 months, not fixing the problem, not finding a solution, and continuing to overcharge some students and subsidize another pool and go to bed at night and feel good about this. And I think the reason that we have a bipartisan agreement is there's some that don't feel good about that. We look at it and we say, the United States Senate hadn't done what people sent us here to do, and that's to get as close to right as we can. And again, I say to my colleagues, and I go to the CBO again, the CBO scored the bill. And CBO says that the bipartisan bill is within 0.7% of having no cost and no surplus. I'm not sure that you can get any closer than that. And they've also told us verbally, and they showed us in scoring, put the cap in and you raise the interest rate on all students, all postgraduates, all parents. And our objective when Senator Manchin and Senator King and Senator Coburn and Senator Alexander got into the discussion was, how do we get rates as low as we can? Our focus was on the affordability for the students. Secondarily, the sustainability of the program, which was long-term, something that we didn't visit every 1 or 2 or 3 years. So let me just get into specifics, because there are 4 proposals out there. One of them's already passed the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives has a 10-year variable rate that fluctuates annually. For unsubsidized loans, the rate's 4.31. For subsidized loans, the rate's 4.31, which is 10-year plus 2.5%. For plus loans, 5.74. It removes the consolidation cap, removes it. And it creates caps of 8.5% and 10.5%. Now, the vote that we will have at noon, I think everybody knows, it's a 6.8% rate for most students. 26% get a subsidized rate of 3.4%. The plus loans are at 7.9%, and that's 18% of the loans at 7.9%. Under the president's proposal, the unsubsidized is, I think this is backward. I think it's the subsidized at 10 year and 0.93. The unsubsidized at 10 year, 2.93. The plus at 10 year plus 3.93. And it's uncapped and fixed for life. So it brings us to the bipartisan bill. Senator from West Virginia said it well. What were the agreements we made? We're not going to make money, and we're not going to lose money on it. We're at 0.7% according to CBO. Undergraduate is an undergraduate. We shouldn't cheat one to subsidize another. But there should be a subsidy for low income, for at-risk students. The subsidy is that they're not responsible for their interest payment while they're in school. The reality is we extend the same 10-year bond plus 1.85% to all undergraduates. To graduate students, we bring the rate down to 10-year plus 3.4, and for plus loans, 10-year plus 4.4. And we keep in place the consolidation cap that has been in law. Let me remind my colleagues what I said earlier before they came. From 1962 to 1965 to 1992, the cap on student loans was 10%. 10%. If we put that in today, it's going to raise the percentage that each individual is going to pay.
So, Senator, just
be happy
Senator
to
yield again. Senator, if I may put it, I'm not sure how you voted on the extension a year ago. I voted for the extension a year ago.
As did I.
And I don't intend to vote on it again for an extension, because we haven't fixed it. If by voting on this extension, what we're voting on is 3.4% just for the subsidized, and everybody at 6.8 and at 7.9 for plus loans, correct? So when you're talking about that, the difference of savings, Senator, between our bill, if we got to vote on our bill, the compromise bipartisan bill, our bill would save close to $9 billion in interest that students wouldn't have to pay. I think we agreed on that, correct?
Absolutely.
If we vote on the bill that we're only going to have, I think, a chance to vote on one bill, that's about $2 billion. In West Virginia, that's a lot of money in savings of $7 billion that I don't, and students don't have to pay in interest. And that's across the board. And that's most of the students who have the subsidized and unsubsidized loans. That's the point we're trying to make, and we hope we get that through. And I know that you hope, that I do, we get a vote on this.
The senator yield for.
I think he has the floor, sir, and I'll be happy.
Be happy to yield from Senator from Iowa.
I would just say to my friend from West Virginia, made a statement a few minutes ago that resonated with me. He said that we're trying to get to market rates because we've always had market rates. I would say to my friend from West Virginia, as I pointed out yesterday, that when I first went to college in 1958, 59, 60, 61, I borrowed money under this program. It came into being in 58, so 59 was the first year I borrowed money. It was called the National Defense Education Act, or the Eisenhower Bill at that time. So I went back and looked to see what the Treasury, 10-year Treasury note was at that time for those 3 years that I borrowed. The 10-year Treasury note at that time ranged between 4.2 and about 4.8%. I borrowed money at 2%. That's not a market rate, I say to my friend. Plus, not only did I borrow the money, but all the time I was in college, I paid no interest charges. I spent 5 years in the military, no interest charges. I then went to law school, 3 years in law school, no interest charges. And then I had a 1-year grace period after I graduated from law school, no interest charges. So for all those years, the interest rate clock never started ticking.
Was that for every student, sir, that was in college at that time, no matter what their ranking and no matter what service they had performed for the military or the IBL? Was that for everybody?
Anybody.
So everybody in college during that period of time paid the lowest rate of 2% with no interest at all?
That's right. So
let me say to my colleague, one thing.
The reason I raise that is, why were we so special? Why was my generation so special that this country was willing to subsidize my education? But for these young people here, we're saying, no, you got to pay market rates.
It might have been that Congress did a better job of getting its financial house in order than we have.
Well, I'm just saying that we made a commitment at that time to invest in a generation of young Americans so that they wouldn't have a huge amount of debt hanging over their heads. But it seems now, I just wanted to make it so that it has not always been so that...
I could say to my colleague, what didn't exist when he went through college and graduate school was that we didn't have an income test for repayment. We don't charge anybody over 15% on an annual basis. When the gentleman went through the system, he was responsible to pay back 100% of it, weren't you? And today, after a certain period of time on the subsidized loans, we forgive it. We've got a lot of programs that didn't exist when he went through school. We've got Pell Grants that extend a tremendous amount of money that's not obligated to be paid back, $4,000. We've got student loan higher education tax credits that didn't exist when he went through education. We've got a basket of products, and what we're looking at is how can we take one program, which is the rate-based program, and make it as attractive and affordable for students as we possibly can. And under this scenario, we're able to accomplish that for 64%. Under what we will vote on, we only do it for 26%. And you can't help but make the argument, you're overcharging here to subsidize here. And I agree with my good friend, who I have great affection for from Iowa, that I want to make sure every student has an opportunity to go to college and it's affordable for all. But we've got a system right now that we control 100% of it, the federal government. When my good friend went through college, there were private lenders that competed with the federal government. We have no private lenders. We legislatively eliminated the private sector from competing with student loans. It's all dominated by the federal government. So at least we can try to get as inexpensively those loans as we can for the largest group of college students. So let me suggest to my colleague, I'm going to ask a unanimous consent request, and I hope that we will entertain this, because I think not only is the debate worthy, a vote is worthy. So I would ask my colleagues, ask unanimous consent that if cloture is not invoked on the pending motion to proceed to S 1238, the Jack Reed bill on student loans, that it then be in order to move to proceed to S 1241, the Manchin bill on student loans. Further, that the cloture motion, which will be at the desk, be considered filed on the motion to proceed, and further, notwithstanding Rule 22, the Senate then immediately proceed to a vote on the motion to invoke cloture on the pending motion to proceed to the Manchin bill S 1241. Before the chair rules, let me just state that this agreement would allow us to have 2 votes on 2 versions of student loan rates that start at noon today.
Objection. Objection is heard.
Madam President, this is an important issue, and I want to thank my colleagues who have engaged earlier this morning to try to find an additional solution. I want to thank Senator Manchin and Senator King and Senator Carper, because they were willing to try to fix this problem. And I'm convinced that my good friend from Iowa, we're doing this in good faith. But now's the time to find a solution. It's not a year from now. It's not a month from now. It's not a week from now. It's today.
If I may ask one question in the spirit of a colloquy to my dear friend from Iowa. I know they're saying 1 year, and they're looking at the compromise, the bipartisan bill that we've worked on. 3 or 4 years from now, rates may go up because market rates will change. If we're only looking at 1 year, is there anything prohibitive in our bill that we couldn't go back a year from now if we see a better solution? If we get an education bill, that we could say, hey, here's the grand bargain now, which is better than what we thought we had. Still yet, ours saves $9 billion, and my dear friends in my caucus, it only saves $2 billion. So if we only do it for 1 year, we help more people, save more money, and then we can go ahead and still rewrite another bill in 1 year. Are we able to do that?
I've learned in my 20 years in Washington that permanent is defined as a 2-year session of Congress, and the next one could easily change it.
So if you look at them 1 year to 1 year, you've got 3.4 for the smallest group, 6.8 for everybody above that, and 7.9 for plus. Under ours, it's 3.66 for all undergraduates, and every rate comes down, correct?
You're correct.
So that's $9 billion versus $2 billion. It's about as simple as I can make it.
And as I said earlier, how does that compute to the average student?
What are they?
It means a lower monthly payment. Under the bill that we will vote on, which is current extension, kicking the can down the road, $78 a month. This is figured on a student that borrows $5,000. Under the bipartisan bill, $75 a month. On the graduate Stafford comparison by month, that person who borrows under the graduate program under the kick the can down the road plan is going to pay $251. Under the bipartisan solution, they're going to have a monthly obligation of $230. For the highest group, the plus loans, in a lot of cases those are parents, the monthly obligation is going to be $197 on the kick the can down the road. And under the bipartisan solution, the monthly obligation is going to be $180 in payments. This is figured again with $5,000 borrowed over a 10-year amortization of the loan. It exactly makes the point that my good friend from West Virginia said. Why would we not take the opportunity to make this cheaper for everybody for the next 12 months? And if we find a better way to do it, let's change it 12 months from now.
And I think, Senator, what we're talking about also is that they're saying if it consolidates, it strings the payment out for the maximum of 30 years, which means they're paying a lot more back in interest, correct? That's the argument that I've heard from different people. So that means why would you have an automatic consolidation? With that being said, I'm understanding that with the government-run loan right now, there's no penalties for me. If I string it out to get the lowest payment for 30 years and then I said, I want to have 10 years, I can do that, correct? That's able to be done. So I can reduce that amount of time and amount of interest, but my affordability to pay more.
I'm going to try to recognize, you're exactly right. I want to recognize the fact that there are others on the other side that would like to speak. So,
okay.
Madam Chair, at this time, I would reserve the balance of the time on our side and yield the floor.